Income minus expenses is not savings. Income minus savings are equal to expenses. For us, destruction is part of creation, and the same thing will be felt across sectors. Some honest entrepreneurs created right quality assets, but most of them were crooks. So if I say I'm very bullish India, I can give you 10 reasons why you should be bearish India.
Hello everyone, you're with Business Insider. I'm Sriram Iyer and this is part of our special series, Budget Insider. Time is short and our guest is one of the biggest money managers in the country, Nilesh Shah, the Group President and Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. So without wasting much time doing introductions, and let's just get straight to the questions. I know you've all been waiting very patiently for this show to kick off. Nilesh, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us here on Business Insider. And the reason we wanted you so badly here with us for this budget series is because of your knack of simplifying things for a young audience, just like what we like to do here. So thank you so much for joining me. This is mid-Jan 2021. And let's get the elephant out of the way because many people in the market have been waiting for a clear answer on when the market will fall off a cliff, but it hasn't yet. Why?
So let me narrate an old Hindi movie song. अनहोनी को होनी कर दे, होनी को अनहोनी, एक जगह पे जमा हो तीनों, अमर, अकबर, एंथनी. Our market witnessed an unhoni. From the mother of bear market in March 20 to mother of bull market in December 20. This is the fastest ever bull run which has happened. In our equity market, three Amar, Akbar, Anthony came together. One is flows, second is sentiments, and third is fundamentals. From a flow point of view, FPIs, after selling 60,000 crore in March 20 and making the bottom of the market, went on a buying spree, especially in November and December. They bought 60,000 crore plus in those 2 months individually. And collectively in CY21, they bought $23 billion. On top of FPI flows, retail investors were continuous buyer throughout calendar year 20. Our estimate is that they would have bought close to $27 billion worth of equity in CY20. Between FPIs and retail investors, flows came in, pulled the market up. The Akbar was sentiments. If you notice, right in March, April, when we were worried about COVID-19, sentiment took a hit and market made a bottom. Month after month thereafter, economic activity kept on improving. Active cases started falling after September. Vaccination news started coming out. In essence, in the second half of calendar year 20, sentiments kept on getting boosted with every good news. That also pulled market up. Flows and sentiments are fickle. Ultimately, what drives market is fundamental. And the entry buy of our market is corporate profitability. In September 20, Nifty 50 companies declared their highest ever profit on a quarterly basis at 110,000 crore. It was almost double that of what was declared in June 20. On a year-on-year basis, it was up 35%. And this happened when sales were down 7%. Market, which was looking expensive on June 20 earnings, suddenly started looking fairly valued on September 20 earnings. So flows, sentiments, and fundamentals all came together to create this unholy.
So I think I just want to do a sort of devil's advocate here in the sense that those people who say that the stock market is not reflecting the real health of the economy because flows and sentiments are 2 out of 3 factors pushing the market. Whereas fundamentally speaking, the companies may be posting profits, but the consumer economy is still struggling in a big way because unemployment is a problem. Most of the profits for corporates came from job cuts and salary cuts and all of those things, which will eventually hurt the same companies because the consumer is going to be poor off. So how do you see this playing out? How do we make the stock market a better gauge of the economy? And I'm sort of alluding to the fact that the government wants more manufacturing, people want more jobs, but our Sensex and the Nifty manufacturing is a small portion of what constitutes a Sensex and Nifty. Is this likely to be fixed in the near term to a, let's say, a year or two? Or what does the road ahead look like? Should it happen at all?
So one, when people say markets and economy are not linked, they are missing the point that markets are forward looking and economic data is backward looking.
Okay.
When you look at unemployment numbers for December, it's showing the situation in December. Market is factoring in what will be future unemployment. It will be higher or lower. Now let's look at the December data. GST collection all-time high at 1,15,000 crore. Is it only coming from large companies? Answer is no, because e-way bill generations are up 16%. Power consumption all-time high at 1,82,000 megawatt plus. Now this can't be consumed only by large companies because we are seeing FASTag collection and Google Mobility Index also at all-time high level. If you look at foreign exchange reserves, it's including forwards upwards of $600 billion all-time high level. Put all this data together, we are clearly seeing month-on-month improvement in economy. The December unemployment number was 9%. But if you look at the unemployment number for January beginning, it is 7.4%. In rural India, it is below national average at 7.1. And in urban India, it is 7.9. So slowly and steadily, economy is improving. Companies are becoming competitive. Businessmen and entrepreneurs are becoming bullish about future. And that is reflected in our PMI number, which is all into expansionary zone above 50 for manufacturing as well as services. So market, right or wrong, is looking towards the future. Economic data is representing the past, and which is where sometimes data is poor and yet markets are rising because it is discounting positivity.
Okay. So the markets are more optimistic than the data is as of now because they both are looking in two different directions. Which is a very, so now with these two questions, Nilesh, we have set out what the current state of affairs is. And therefore, based on this, based on the data that you've seen, what should be Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's approach in the budget? Should she work, prepare a document for an optimistic document, or should it be a more careful, sort of targeted, support-oriented, giving people incentives and SOPs? What should be the approach like?
So when I was starting my career,
once again, just to put it in a very simpler context and sort of to say that should she reward a good student or should she punish a bad student?
So when I was starting my career in stock market, someone elderly told me very nicely that beta, pessimistic always sounds intelligent, but it is optimistic who makes money. So be always optimist.
Okay.
And in my 3 decades career, being optimist has never failed me. So finance minister should be optimistic about future. It's like Ajinkya Rahane. Your top batsmen are missing, your top bowlers are missing, they are getting injured. The whole team was out for 36 runs. You were given a crushing defeat. Now he could have dropped his shoulders and gone and said that, oh my God, we have such a trouble. OCs are marauding. Or he could have gone with optimism. I think he would have gone with optimism, and that's why we are seeing this fighting Indian cricket team. What's true for Indian cricket team is true for Indian economy. The leader has to be optimist. Right from the bottom, he has to think about light at the end of the tunnel. And fortunately, for us, Indian economy is already doing well. In terms of pandemic, we have managed pandemic far better than best of the countries in the world. That's a great achievement. Why not be proud of it? Our economy did suffer in first week of July, first quarter of FY21 in June 20 quarter ending, but thereafter we have recovered.
So Nilesh wants the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to be optimistic and hope for a better India while she prepares the budget. Message taken. Let's get to the sort of the bare bones of it. Let's go through the skeletals. Now, there are so many conversations. People are saying there will be new income tax slabs. There will be a COVID cess. there will be a bad bank, there will be production incentives for automobile companies, there will be the economy needs a lot of things. Like today we've heard that the lack of semiconductors has led to Ford shutting down its plant for some time. So there are a lot of things there, the gaps already exist. So according to you, and in simple terms, before we went deeper into each one of these issues, what would be the priority list? Just the headlines, right? This is the first thing to be done. This is the second thing to be done. So if you have like 5 or 6 or 10, whatever number, in the descending order of priority, what would that be?
So my first priority will be to support needy sector of economy, tourism, retailing, construction, bottom of the pyramid people, MSME. They have been hit hard with COVID-19. We must support them so that there is better financial inclusion and they are also able to participate in growth. Now, this can be done in variety of formats. You can give concessional financing, you can give subsidies, you can give grant, you can create mechanism through which they will be able to grow on their own. So there are multiple options which are available. But you can only spend if you have money. Now, you can raise money by borrowing or by raising resources without resorting to borrowing. Now, borrowing is burden on future generation. As a father, I never want my daughter to carry my burden. So borrowing is, to the extent possible, avoidable. The second is raising resources. I can raise taxes, but higher taxes does not give better tax collection. In fact, it creates tax avoidance, tax chori. At one point of time, India had 97% peak income tax, but our tax collection in those days was far lower than what it is today. So we can't raise taxes to raise resources. So we have to think innovatively to raise resources. And fortunately for India, there are multiple ways. Let me give you a few examples. In India, tax leakages are quite common. There are numerous ways in which people avoid paying taxes by finding loopholes. I will recommend let's plug all those loopholes so that people pay fair share of taxes. How do you create that mechanism? Invite India's top 20 chartered accountants, request them to plug all the loopholes by appropriate regulation. That partnership is like ethical hacking. Companies produce nice programs, nice products, then they invite ethical hackers to find the loopholes and they bridge those gaps. Why not do ethical hacking in taxation? This chartered accountants exactly know where the loopholes are. Give them the power to plug the loopholes. They'll be more than happy to do it for the country. You plug the loopholes, our tax to GDP ratio, which is comparable to African nations, will at least move to the Asian nations. Today, geographically, we are situated in Asia, but from a tax compliance point of view, we are situated in Africa. Even a country like Rwanda has a better tax to GDP ratio than India.
No, in fact, Tesla, which is coming to India, has to set up its subsidiary in Amsterdam. Why? What can we do that I mean, just imagine the headlines and the brand value of India going up if someone like Elon Musk sets a subsidiary in India and sort of says and vouches for the ease of doing business here. Why can't we make that happen, and what should the budget do for that?
So again, we are such a large country that we have to think about positivity. There was a global turbine maker which set up their factory in China in 18 months. When they came to India, they said, we want to outperform China. Will it be possible? And of course, they had apprehensions. In 15 months, their factory was up and running. Now, these are the things we have to highlight. When Suzuki came to India in the 80s, they had no idea what Maruti will become. Today, Maruti's market cap is bigger than Suzuki. Where will you get this kind of growth opportunity? Maruti produces more cars than Suzuki. Maruti sells only in India. Suzuki sells worldwide. So in a country like India, which is such a large country, should we focus on our positivity or should we focus on our negativity? I think we want foreigners to come to India, but we should not be going by their opinion. See, there are two kinds of foreigners, and I will call them.
No, I'm not saying let's chase Elon Musk. Let's say Elon Musk has decided to come to India on his own accord. I'm not saying he's the only one to stamp that whether we are a good country to do business in. But once he has decided, why not make it sweet enough for him to put all the pies on our basket? Why should he?
Sriram, we have no idea whether he has set up factory and he has set up company in Amsterdam from an American tax point of view or Indian tax point of view.
Oh, okay. That's a fair point. Yeah, cool. Point well taken. So then, so ease of doing business. So there is definitely room to improve it, right? So what would be your sort of checklist of top 3 items?
So essentially, if I put it simply, we have either Singur model or Sanand model for doing business. Now, Tata's
In
India's most
2021, it's
respected.
such a loaded statement. Okay, we just had a
No,
conversation.
but that,
Yeah.
Sriram, that's the reality. Tata is India's most respected business house. They created miracle like Jamshedpur in the desert of Jharkhand. They went to Singur to set up automobile plant. They tried very hard, but they finally failed, and they had to move out to Sanand. Apparently, Mr. Ratan Tata got a SMS Suswagatam, welcome. When he went there, he was given land, he was given power connection, infrastructure was developed, approvals were given, 24/7 support was given. In 18 months, Tata Nano started rolling out from Sanand factory. Now, if we adopt Singur model, then developments will never happen. Ease of doing business will never improve. If we follow Sanand model, then ease of doing investment, ease of doing business is visible to everyone. So as a country, we have to decide what do we stand for, Sanand model or Singur model.
So let's say, obviously we want people to invest. I mean, Indian private investors have been very shy over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Every year we've been discussing what does it take to kick off India's animal spirits, what will get the the Tatas, Ambanis, and Mahindras and every other person to sort of increase investment. What is missing even now? Why is that confidence that is visible in the stock market not visible when it comes to making announcements of new capacity, those kind of things?
So it's a narrative which is not backed by data.
Okay.
If you look at gross capital formation in 2012, 34% was the ratio. In 2020, it has fallen to 28%, 6% drop. The government and private investors were contributing 18% of gross capital formation in 2012. It's now 17% in 2020. It's a drop of just 1%. On the other hand, private households, you and me, who were contributing about 16% of gross capital formation in 2012, mainly by buying of real estate, has fallen to 11%. So it's not Tata, Birlas and Ambanis and Adanis who are not investing. It is Shriram and Nilesh Shah who is not investing.
Okay.
Now, how do we support Nilesh Shah and Shriram's and other individuals to buy real estate? So real estate construction, they were contributing about 15% of India's GDP. Today they contribute about 6%. There is a significant drop.
That was going to be my next question, that exact data point. But yeah, please carry on.
So this is gross capital formation which has come down. Now, today stars are aligned for real estate activity. In work from home, all of us, Shriram, are one room short of our houses. I'm staying in 4-bedroom house. I want 5th bedroom so that I can do my work properly. So there is customer demand. Real estate prices since 2016 have stagnated or they have come down actually. So it has become more affordable. The affordability index from 50 has come down to now about 28. So it has become more affordable to buy a house. Housing loan interest is available at 6.75% from my own bank, Kotak Bank. Today, state governments are not able to borrow at that rate. So it's very, very cheap borrowing. On top of it, government is giving stamp duty concessions in several states, including my own state, Maharashtra. And finally, we are also seeing through RERA customer protection. See, earlier the agreements were loaded in favor of builders. Now agreements are balanced between builders and the buyers. Put all these things together, construction sector is bound to go up As construction sector goes, automatically your capital investments will grow. And if this consumption picks up, then automatically private sector investment will also follow. There is liquidity, there is low interest rates, there is availability of capital in plenty in global markets, local markets.
But there
So
is
stars are aligned.
the consumer sentiment is not that strong, which is visible in the RBI data.
See, again, we are such a heterogeneous country that if you pick one set of data, it will give you one direction. I will always say that in India, opposite is also true.
Yeah.
So if I say I'm very bullish India, I can give you 10 reasons why you should be bearish India. As an investor, as a common man, we have to be optimistic about future.
So let's say, real estate is a great example for the steps that the government has already taken in the Atmanirbhar Bharat program post the COVID crisis. And that is true for a lot of other sectors as well. Do you think there is enough space in this budget for the government to do more? Like you said, resources is a problem. And therefore, and of course, there are announcements which will have to take effect. So you have to see the result and then plan your next strategy, the next step. Where do you think are the immediate opportunities? And therefore, and sort of in the context of real estate or banking and finance or SMEs, where do you think is the next opportunity and what would that be?
I don't think so. Resources are constrained. Our government is asset rich. If we monetize our assets, there will be enough resources to maintain spending, accelerate growth, and yet maintain path of fiscal prudence. Now, clearly, budget needs to focus on activities which can create multiplier effect. Construction, real estate is one. Now, government has also launched a fantastic scheme called PLI. Many years ago, we launched Textile Upgradation Fund to make India global textile manufacturing hub. Intention then was that, our textile exports will grow and we will be able to get businesses in exports market from China and other countries. That scheme failed miserably. Our textile exports remains lower than Bangladesh and Vietnam by a margin. Now, why did textile upgradation scheme fail? Because it was giving concessional loans at very attractive rates for creation of fixed assets. Some honest entrepreneurs created right quality assets, but most of them were crooks. They gold-plated their plant and machinery and projects and siphoned off the money, and eventually that became NPA. Despite giving concessional financing and fiscal incentive, India didn't become textile manufacturing hub. Now government has come out with production-linked incentive scheme. There's no incentive for setting up a plant. But if your plant starts producing, then you get incentive. Faster you produce, you get higher incentive. More you produce, you get higher incentive. Now this is coming at a time when businesses are shifting out of China to other places. Every other country is trying to grab that pie. We are also there in competition. Other countries have far better infrastructure, maybe even better ease of doing business, but none of them have large market like India. So I will be able to get many companies out of China to come to India. Samsung has already set up their entire mobile handset plants from China to India. High-end color television, they are in the process of relocating. There is a German footwear company which has shifted their entire footwear business from China to India. So this PLI scheme has been structured well, learning from Textile Upgradation Fund, and it is, coming at the right time. If we can create this kind of momentum, then automatically growth will happen. My feeling is that between construction and PLI scheme, we could be looking to add a percentage point each to India's GDP over a period of time.
So how long is that period of time?
It all depends upon how you execute on the ground.
Okay.
Stars are aligned, but it doesn't mean that everything will happen on its own. We still have to work. The central government, the state government, the local government has to come together for facilitating real estate transactions. The central government, state government, local government has to come together to create Sanand model.
So we have done about 22 minutes of chat so far, and I'm going to summarize some of the key takeaways for our audience. And Nilesh, please correct me if I'm wrong at any point in either understanding or missing the nuance. So you say that the focus should be on sectors like construction, real estate, consumer-driven sectors like retail. So essentially, and all of these are very high employment generating sectors. So essentially, you're saying that these sectors should be given uh, enough resources to build on the opportunity that is available. There is potential according to you, but it has to be executed. Now, the way to go about it is not to give cheap loans or interest-free loans or or to set up projects or set up factories or not those kind of things, because typically in the past, like we've seen in the case of textiles, people take the money to set up a plant but nothing really happens. They sort of over invoice everything else, and that money is lost, which again results in the bad loans like we see with the banks. So therefore, the way to give this boost to these sectors of the economy is to say that you show me the work and I will give you an incentive. You show me that you can produce, you show me that you have orders, and therefore I will give you the options. So in a sense, sort of backing the winner kind of a model, right? Just like how coaching centers would give admission only to children who have 90% plus, just as much as schools or colleges. But having said that, this is a more efficient way of allocating government resources according to you. Number three, uh, resources are not a problem according to you for the government. While it might have already spent a lot of money in keeping the economy afloat at the worst of the times, which is between March and December 2020, there will still be no dearth of money if the government agrees to sell its assets, which includes stake in PSU banks, I'm assuming, Air India, stake in companies like BPCL, Concor, all of the entire list that's available on Business Insider India and every other paper. Now, according to you, let's talk about the banks, right? There is, once again, in a crisis period, this argument will come back again, whether to privatize or not, because we have seen that the PSU banks have delivered a major public good by supporting the lowest strata of the society in terms of crisis. And therefore, when you say let's go privatize or sell more stake, bring it down to 51%, etc., there will be opposing voices. How would you respond to that?
So one, are we saying that private companies don't do social service? Answer is clearly no. Second, by putting money into PSU bank, are we doing disservice on capital allocation side? Answer is possibly yes. The government has pumped in close to 2 lakh crore into PSU banks. But if government is not getting any reward, then that 2 lakh crore is a wastage. I think the best model for India is public-private partnership. And it is best illustrated in Maruti Suzuki in Hindustan Zinc. Hindustan Zinc was making 100,000 tons in 2002-2003. It was loss-making entity, taking 250 crore plus support from the exchequer. It was privatized. I think 45% stake was sold to Vedanta for roughly about little under 800 crore, 769 crore to be precise. Today, Vedanta makes, Hindustan Zinc makes 1.6 million ton. In 17 years, production is up 16 times. It contributes 10,000 crore to the exchequer by way of taxation, royalties, and dividend. The 30% residual stake of the government is valued at 30,000 crore. Now, is this service to the society? Answer is yes. Because when government was funding 250 crore into Hindustan Zinc, it was losing revenue. With 10,000 crore coming from Hindustan Zinc to government's kitty, they will be able to set up schools, they will be able to set up healthcare, they will be able to do many other things. So we need to be focused on capital allocation, and public-private partnership will make a big difference. And the beauty is that the same PSU bank employees, when they are working in PSU banks, they don't create miracle. They move into private sector, they create miracle. Employees are the same, but they don't get that fertile ground of becoming entrepreneur, of becoming professional manager due to various restrictions imposed on them. In PSU bank, every third year person is transferred. In private bank, specialization gets developed. In PSU bank, decision making gets influenced outside of commercial consideration. In private banks, it is to a far lesser extent. How do we empower our
So,
PSU
in one short
employees?
point, are you in favor of complete privatization, or let's say bring all stakes down to 51%? That's enough.
See, case by case, take a call. But my endeavor will be to create public-private partnership so that you give managerial control to professionals and retain minority shareholding with you. Because when those professional entrepreneurs create wealth, they create market cap, government benefits.
Okay. So I'm going to take one small detour because this is something that we are working on at Business Insider, a sort of a special package that we are going to come out with very soon. We're talking about what is this whole problem of Indian banking transition into the technology era, right? Which has been a big problem, whether it is private or public. Public sector banks, there is no, the technology deployment is abysmal. Even private sector banks, the user experience, so to speak, the kind of development, the progress in the digital banking and the net banking space there is a lot left to desire even in 2021. Do you think how is it going to play out according to you? For example, we're constantly talking about people moving from PSU banks to private banks, the market share gains that are possible that have happened in the past. Do you think that this whole fintech revolution that is coming up, it is visibly putting even private banks on their toes? They are literally chasing their own tail. How do you see this playing up? I mean, a lot of people say that these banks were sort of setting themselves up to be disrupted. Do you agree with that thought?
So, Shriram, there was one colonial magazine reporter in India. When he was in India, he was always negative about India. Then he was deputed to France.
Okay.
The first tweet he put in France is that France is so backward in banking. To transfer money from one bank account to another bank account, it takes days. In India, I was able to do instantly. So our banking system, compared to many other parts of the world, is fairly advanced, fairly customer-centric. We are doing this on a huge amount of load. We opened more Jan Dhan accounts than 10 times Australia's population. So, yes, there is scope for improvement, but what we have created is fantastic. Today, when we go abroad and try to visit their bank branches and see how their banks are operating, they have many legacy issues because when they started automation and computerization, their technology was fairly backdated, or it was up to date at that point of time, but has now become backdated. Fortunately, we jumped straight into the modern technologies. Now, fintechs all over the world are creating disruption, and India is also encouraging fintechs.
Yeah.
These are smart people, innovative people, willing to change the world. And they are getting backed by money power of venture capital and private equity investors. So any organization, whether it's in financial services or otherwise, will have to be worried about the disruptor. If you don't become disruptor of your own business model, you will become like dinosaur. Your tail will be on fire and you won't even recognize it. And this is the beauty of market. Innovation will always create destruction and disruption, and the new will emerge stronger. If we see Indian mythology, we have Brahma, Vishnu, Sadasiv. Brahma creates, Vishnu maintains, and Shiva destroys. For us, destruction is part of creation, and the same thing will be felt across, across
Do you
sectors.
see? So instead of earlier the binary, which was PSU banks versus private banks, will there now be a, let's say, a Tridev, PSU banks, private banks, and fintech as a consumer choice? And I'm talking about this sheerly from the growth point of view of, the Paytms and the PhonePays and foreign companies like Revolut, etc., which are coming to India now. They're looking for a CEO as we speak. Now, these are some very disruptive products, and therefore, is this market share conversation going to be completely different, let's say 6 months to a year down the line?
Undoubtedly, fintechs, domestic as well as global, will continue to come wave after wave to disrupt existing banking business, and banks will have to reinvent themselves. We had Mr. Aditya Puri of HDFC Bank, when he was the CEO of that bank, saying that I'm a fintech company. Clearly, every bank will have to reinvent. The choice is not public, private, or fintech. Choice is dinosaur versus disruptor.
So great. So let's get back to the business. We are complete to the budget. We're running out of time. I hope you have another 5 minutes max. That's all the time that I will take from you. So talking about we've spoken about PSU banks. The government should look at selling stake in PSU banks. You would say you would prefer something less than 50%, so that the government there is more value to be created. Let's talk. But disinvestment has not been easy, obviously. Um, let's talk about is this the time, this Jan Feb March, or is this whole disinvestment conversation going to get pushed into next year, whether it's Air India, whether it is would you say sooner the better, because you also need the money?
So disinvestments, when we have to run through market route, then it does not give you best result. In listed companies, we have always seen when a strategic buyer comes to buy, he pays a premium to closing market price, and it's a substantial premium. When you give managerial control, you also get a substantial premium. So choice is strategic divestment versus market divestment. Past experience does tell that strategic divestment will give you far better buy. The second thing is that when you are doing strategic divestment, should we have a timeline? The answer is no. If the buyer knows that you are desperate to sell, he's not going to give you a full price. You have to sit on the table showing the opportunity without the urgency. Urgency should be with you, not visible to the buyer. If we follow this principle, I'm sure global corporates will be willing to pay a fair price for buying Indian PSU assets. These are great sets of assets, very valuable sets of assets, and they will create wonders in the hands of private entrepreneur like Hindustan Zinc or Maruti Suzuki has shown.
So that leads us to the next question, which is the LIC IPO. Are you happy with the progress so far? Or, I mean, unfortunately, this was a bad year. Maybe they could have made it faster if things were slightly better. But is there an urgency to sell LIC IPO before kick off the process before March, or can it wait?
See, LIC, because of COVID-19, would have been impacted from a process point of view. It is not a company, it's a corporation. So first you'll have to corporatize it. So far, whatever surplus LIC was generating was going by way of dividend to the government. Now you have to retain it from a shareholder point of view. Now, all these things will take time because LIC is such a giant organization. It's not a small company, it's mini India.
Yep.
Their business operations will be comparable to a small, country. So we have to go.
So what are we expecting to hear from Nirmala Sitharaman around the LIC IPO on the 1st of February?
When she should not talk about one company. She should talk about that instead of market divestment, we'll prefer strategic divestment. We will conduct strategic divestment without a timeline pressure so that we can get the best value. And we will encourage public-private partnership so that government, while offering managerial control, retains the upside of the shareholding.
Awesome. So, and one last question, because we were talking about technology. We've seen a spectacular rally in technology shares, the IT services in India, nearly 50% jump or over 50% jump in the last 6 months or so. Is this going to be something, and this is something that is expected to last even from your institution's point of view? How do you see the market mixtures changing over the next, say, 6 months to a year? In terms of services, already contribute make for a big chunk of India's benchmark indices. How much more important can tech shares get? What more weightage? Because we still have banking and financial sort of being a big part of it, the biggest part of it. Is that equation going to change over the next 6 months to a year?
So services is a large portion of India's GDP, and hence it is reflected into benchmark indices.
Yeah.
What we have to ensure is that we create opportunities for all the three sectors: services, manufacturing, and agriculture. Now, agriculture cannot become large part of the economy by limitations of agriculture, but that doesn't mean that agriculture does not prosper. A Netherlands which is probably the size of a small state of India, has agriculture exports of $80 billion. We are now no longer food deficit country. We are food surplus country. We are carrying double the food grains which is required.
This
When you carry
fast
that food grain, there is a
agriculture
cost.
conversation is, I think, out of the hands of everyone. Now, nobody can talk about it with any amount of authority, honestly speaking, because it's just become one big mega mess, and God only knows how it's going to get resolved. And just for
No,
the record, Business Insider has taken a stance that this is, I mean, the existing system has not helped Indian agriculture, and therefore there is a need for new thought with checks and balances. Of course, some of the fears that have been expressed by those protesting against these farm bills, the fears are valid, but of course they're not substantiated yet. Let us allow for some new ideas to come about. Yes, some of them might be risky, but let's put a monitoring mechanism instead of ruling them out altogether. And because Punjab or Haryana, these are not the benchmarks for how agriculture performs in the rest of India. We go from one crisis year to another. We'll have one good year when the monsoon helps us, but there is no structural system in place. And I'm saying all of this just to put on record what our stance has been. But of course, from a reform point of view, just to add to what you were saying.
so in 91, when we introduced liberalization and economic reforms, there were many protesting industrialists who says if you bring import duty, we will be dead.
Yeah.
On the other end, there were sets of entrepreneurs in telecom industry, IT industry, pharma industry, engineering industry who said, oh, this is fantastic. Now we have ability to grow. There were so many companies which died because of competition. There were so many companies which prospered because of competition. And eventually, India overall benefited by way of 1991 reforms. All changes are disturbing in nature, but the only constant in nature is change.
Okay,
The
since you
species
brought up
keep
that,
on evolving.
I have a query because right now there is also a lot of noise about import substitution, basically making imports more expensive. And this is something that even the government seems to want to do, which goes against what you just said. What we want to do in agriculture, we want to do the exact opposite in industry, and that has negative repercussions too. Where do you strike? How does the budget strike a balance on that count? Where yes, we need to promote domestic industries. Let's take Tesla for example, right? We want foreign investors to come in, but we also want our own electric vehicle makers to thrive, our own people to sort of be big enough to compete with them. And how do you sort of bridge that divide?
So the ideal model for me is Chinese model. They invited global companies to come to China. Those guys set up small factories. Their technology was, nationalized by China. Employees were shifted from one factory to another factory, from foreign company to local company. And over a period of time, they created their far more effective business
That's
models.
also the Maruti model.
No, in Maruti, Suzuki's ownership continues and they continue to remain the largest automobile
Okay, yeah,
company
okay.
of India. In China, General Motors is no longer the largest automobile company.
Okay. So
So
it's essentially
that's one side of model. I don't think so. We as a country are going to do that. We believe in fair play. And Maruti Suzuki is the right model. Suzuki came to India. They brought Japanese quality. They brought Japanese manufacturing practices. They brought Japanese component makers. They created joint ventures with India. They created car financing companies. They encourage exports. Today, automobile is probably the only manufacturing sector where we are net exporter. Our total automobile exports, including two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, is about $17 billion, which is very positive. So we need more and more Suzukis in India.
so, but the overall picture for car makers is not looking that great in India, right? Right now, over the last 2 years, we've seen them struggle.
See, April, May, June, there was no car sales. But December, car makers are facing supply constraints. The demand is there, they are not able to supply.
Awesome. So on that note, we are about to call it a day. But Nilesh, from an investment point of view, from a young person, a salaried individual, or an entrepreneur, looking at this budget as an event. I know, like, we do 1 month of budget coverage, and after the budget event, we all have this habit of saying, okay, budget is a non-event, things will be done outside the budget. Is this going to be the case again? How should people sort of plan? Obviously, I want you to talk about long-term investments and being patient and not looking for these, quick bucks to be made in the stock market.
So for a young investor in his investment career, he's probably going to see 40 to 50 budgets. One budget here or there wouldn't make a difference. What he has to focus upon is just three things. Number one, income minus expenses is not savings. Income minus savings are equal to expenses. Please develop this most valuable habit of saving something every month. Number two, savings alone is not good enough. It has to be invested appropriately. Do a regular investment through SIP in equity mutual funds. Be a long-term investor. And finally, you have to follow an asset allocation model. Buy when things
While
are
you're at it, while you're at it, also tell us your preferred asset allocation right now as for an individual investor in
Sure.
a descending order of priority.
So you have to follow disciplined asset allocation, buy what is cheap, sell what is expensive. Now at this point of time, Kotak Mutual Fund's asset allocation call is equal weight equity. It's not cheap like March 20. It's not expensive also in a bubble zone where you want to move out of equity, lock, stock and barrel. It's equal weight. There will be volatility, but from here onwards, you will be rewarded for your patience long-term investing. Number two, within large cap, mid cap, small cap, there is almost equilibrium, but small caps are little better valued compared to large cap. So marginal overweight small and mid cap, marginal underweight large cap. On the fixed income side, we see pendulum kind of range bound interest rate movement. So try to invest in dynamic bond fund or credit risk fund where carry is higher. Now this again will require volatility acceptance because NAVs will move up and down even in fixed income funds. On gold, we think world full of low interest rates and high liquidity will be supportive to gold prices. But when you're investing in gold, do remember that in India there is 12.5% import duty. Tomorrow, if import duty becomes zero, rupee gold prices will correct by 12.5% overnight. So be aware of that risk and then invest in gold. Again, gold call is equal weight gold subject to import duty. On the real estate side, our view is positive. There is pent-up demand. There is far more security for buyer of the real estate, and hence one can look to invest into real estate. Our feeling is that the semi-urban India, the periphery of a city where there will be large demand, those real estates will appreciate. But real estate at the end of the day is location, location, and location. So these are broadly our call on the asset classes.
Awesome. Amazing. I think that was very simply, very succinctly put for anyone who's looking for a quick cheat sheet on how to put their money, especially before March. Income tax slabs will change. All of that will happen. But like Nilesh said, income minus expenses is not your savings. The amount of money that you spend in a month should be income minus your savings. So fix your savings first and then decide how much you need to spend. On that beautiful note, on that very inspiring note, Nilesh, thank you so much for taking time out for Budget Insider. And we hope to get you back on Budget Day, at least for a few minutes, to tell us whether some of your expectations have been met by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. I hope you will do that for our viewers as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.